script. And what does that mean? Well, we're going to look at it. Let's go to Acts chapter 24. One of the things that we learned, and as we learned this lesson, then we added layers to it. And we're going to do that this morning, and we're going to add one more layer to it. In Acts chapter 24, we learn through Paul that sometimes serving God involves a little bit of waiting on our part. Sometimes God doesn't answer as we think he should or as quickly as he should. So in Acts chapter 24, he is on trial. Paul is before Felix. And if you were with us, he is a very good orator. And so he kind of gives his defense in a very well-intentioned manner. And you read it and you think to yourself, wow, it was brilliant. This guy's going to let him go and he'll be back to business, preaching to the big crowds, going to the tabernacles. But when we got to verse 22, something interesting happened. So he gives all of these things. Let's back up to verse 18. He says, he was accused of doing things he shouldn't. He goes, I was ceremonial clean when they found me in the temple doing this, even though they said that he wasn't. Verse 19, but there were some Jews in the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have any. Or these who are here should state what crime they found me when I stood before the Sanhedrin, unless it was the one thing I shouted as I stood before them. There was this argument over the resurrection of dead. So he gets finished, and verse 22. Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, that's what they began to call the early Christians, the followers of the way, he adjourned the proceedings. And he said, when Lysias the commander comes, I will decide your case. He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but give him some freedom and permit his friends to come and take care of his needs. And so at that point, we're like, what? This is the great apostle Paul, hand-picked by Jesus to bring the story of Jesus to the Gentiles. So you would think God would watch over him. He's on trial, he wins the trial, and he's back out telling the story, but he's under house arrest. And so the lesson that we learned is sometimes with God, it is a waiting game. He doesn't always answer our prayers in the manner and the time that we'd like him to. And we talked about the fact, if you're like me, if I put up a prayer request at 11:30, by 11:45, I'm looking for an answer. Anybody in that category? Right? We want God to respond right away, but he doesn't. And so then after we talked about that, then we added a layer. Because while you're waiting, there's something else that the scripture says that we must do. Let's remind ourselves. Let's go back to the book of Isaiah, chapter 8. Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 17. In this, Isaiah is talking about God, his relationship with him, and he mentions that during this particular period of time, God is not as involved with the nation of Israel as he has been. He's not blessing in the manner that he should. And he says, I will wait for the Lord who currently is hiding his face from the house of Jacob. So he's in a difficult period of time. God isn't responding as quickly as anyone would like. But the next layer, sometimes we have to wait. And the next layer is, while you're waiting, he says, I will put my trust in him. There's sometimes things happen that we don't understand. And at that moment, we have to trust him. You know, we had the bad weather on that weekend for the kids. It didn't make sense to me. This is an outreach, and I'm going to tell you something. When it comes to kids and camping or kayaking or canoe trips, you would not believe how much progress you can make with the kids on those weekends. They're away from reality. I know it's going to be hard. You're going to probably report us to the Children's Protective Services. We don't let them use their phones during the day. You vicious creatures. And you know, on the river, they didn't miss it. We're having a great time, laughing together, working together. This river that we're on, it's a very small portion of the it's a Kalamazoo River. I call it the Kalamazoo Creek. It's very tiny. I got some pictures that I'm going to show you. I got one up there now. There's a picture of what it looks like. And there are places that trees have fallen. You got to help the kids over. You really get a chance to know them. And because of the age range they're at, we take 3rd through like 7th, it's a 4-hour trip. And so for me, I had one of the girls she was out of gas. She couldn't do it. So we bring rope with, and so I lashed one of the kids' canoes to mine, and now I got a captive audience for the next hour. But I had a really good chance to talk with her about things in life. So it made no sense to me why the weather would be so bad and we couldn't have it. But what Isaiah says, in the midst of those moments of waiting, you still have to trust. Now, we only had 4 kids on schedule for that first trip. Once that got canceled, we ended up picking up 8 kids, different kids. We just have to trust that God knows more than we do. That's why he adds this to it. Yes, I will wait. That's the first lesson. Sometimes you have to wait. For the Lord, who's hiding his face from the house of Jacob, I will put my trust in him. So lesson 1, sometimes our faith involves waiting. Lesson 2, while you're waiting, you have to be trusting.